the Houston Space Center.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony, your leadership. Administrator Bridenstine, let's talk a little bit about the ISS. As you are aware, last year's budget from the administration proposed ending all federal government funding for the ISS by the year 2025. The Space Subcommittee of this committee held a series of hearings on whether that was wise, whether that was prudent. The testimony we received consistently was that it was not. The space station, as a matter of scientific and technical capability, can continue to be utilized at least until 2030, if not later. And given that the taxpayers have invested over $100 billion in it, the testimony we received is that it was prudent to get the maximum return for that investment, and that it would be nothing short of catastrophic to cede low Earth orbit to the Chinese. In light of that testimony, I introduced legislation that explicitly extended funding for the space station until 2030. This committee passed that legislation unanimously. It went on to pass the Senate unanimously. I was very pleased to see this year's President's budget that did not have that language zeroing out the funding, but instead talked about transitioning to more commercial opportunities, which all of us would like to see, but no longer suggested a threat to the funding for the space station in 2025. I think that is beneficial to the American taxpayer. I think it's also beneficial to our partners in the space station, making clear that our commitment to the station is to get the maximum reasonable life and use out of it. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yes, sir. I have been watching your leadership on this issue with great interest, as you can imagine. And I would say we are starting even right now today to put together all of the tools so that we can commercialize low Earth orbit as rapidly as possible. It is true the language ending direct funding is not the language we're using anymore in 2025, but instead we're transitioning, and that's starting today, transitioning to new funding models that would be enabling of commercial activities. What you'll find in this budget request is $150 million specifically for commercialization activities in low Earth orbit. But that $150 million does not include the great investment that is the ISS that helps us transition. We need to utilize the ISS for the transition to commercialization. It is a tool to get to commercialization. So know this, I believe a day is coming when we will have commercial activities in low Earth orbit. The goal here, Senator, and you know this, NASA wants to be one customer of many customers in a robust commercial marketplace for human activities in low Earth orbit. At the same time, we want to have numerous providers that are competing on cost and innovation to drive down cost and increase access to space. We just recently saw what happens when we can dock a commercial Crew Dragon to the International Space Station with a reusable rocket provided by the private sector. Costs are going to go down, access is going to increase. We don't want to just do it with commercial resupply to the International Space Station, not just with commercial crew to the International Space Station, but actually with habitation in low Earth orbit. The purpose for this ultimately is so we can save resources and use the precious dollars that this committee and the Senate and the House give us, use those precious dollars to go to the moon, where there is not yet a commercial marketplace, but for which we believe there will be a commercial marketplace. Our goal is to retire risk, commercialize, and go further and do more. And I do believe the date very well could be 2025. And that's my goal. And I'm going to be very clear. My goal is to move us to a day where in 2025 we are completely commercialized. But it's important to note that what we're talking about now is the development of a new funding model.
Well, and I want to commend the administration for listening to Congress, that we have long had bipartisan agreement that we will continue America's leadership in space, and listening to Congress is an important part of maintaining that consensus. Another avenue to potentially ensure that we have the funding both for the ISS and for exploration is having our partners and allies pay their fair share. Can you give your thoughts in terms of how much does the United States currently contribute to the fund to operate the ISS, and how does that compare to the contributions of our international partners?
Yes, sir. So right now, when you think about the International Space Station, the United States of America is a partner at about well, I'm talking about the United States segment of the International Space Station. There's the U.S. segment, and then there's the Russian segment. The United States segment, we have international partners on there: Japan, the European Space Agency, Canada. And of course, the European Space Agency includes 11 different nations right there. So on that partnership, the United States of America contributes about 77%. The balance is provided by the rest of those partners. The highest, I think, is around 10%, and then 8%, and Canada is around 3%. I don't want to suggest that this is a bad deal, because what we get for our commitment, there's rights and responsibilities. Our responsibility is at the 77% level. Our rights are at the 77% level. That includes astronauts. It includes experiments on the ISS. So while we are paying a bigger percentage, we are also receiving a bigger benefit from it. That being said, for the future, when we think about the entire architecture between low Earth orbit and the Moon and eventually Mars, we have to change that paradigm. If the United States of America is going to be a 77% contributor, that, in my view, is not the right approach, and it won't be sustainable. My charge is to create the sustainable return to the Moon, which means we need more partnership from more nations. At the same time, we need to take our partners that we currently have and have them increase funding as well, as the United States of America already has done and will continue to do with your leadership, of course.
Thank you.